Splashin Siren Crew, Season 10 starting now. What's Splashin? Welcome to another episode. That new intro always cracks me up. Welcome to another episode of Season 10. This is episode 3 with me, your host, Lashanti the Siren. And today's wonderful guest is the Lauren Ritchie, founder of the Eco Justice Project and a climate and gender storyteller. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you. I've been hearing about you a lot, especially on the earlier days of the podcast, when a news article had come out about you. And I was like, oh my gosh, who's this girl? I need to meet her. I need to find out who she is. So I'm super happy to finally get you on. And it's a privilege, honestly, to be able to speak with you today.
Thank you.
So we can definitely jump right in. I'm very curious to hear a little bit more about some of your background, education, and experience that has brought you to this career path that you've chosen.
Absolutely. Well, again, I just want to say thank you for having me. It's really nice to be here. I love these spaces to be able to bring conservationists, environmentalists together. And I'm born and raised in Grand Bahama, which is where I am now. And I started my journey in school. I was really passionate. I was trying to trace it back as far as it goes, but geography was always my favorite class. Did a lot of coastal cleanups, and I'm really grateful that kind of being in the school system allowed me to do that. So I had enough of a passion for environmentalism where I was like, okay, this is what I want to study in school. So I went off to New York. I went to Columbia, and I studied sustainable development there, which was a major that I really enjoyed because I think I knew that I wasn't necessarily going to be entirely on like the science, the research side of things, but I was really passionate about global issues and trying to find ways to tackle them. I wanted to know about climate change. I wanted to know about the economic and social intersections as well. So having a broad major that was all about development broadly allowed me to be able to explore that. And I graduated in 2020 and 2022. But in 2020, there's so many years, but I started the Eco Justice Project, which has been my main project to date in 2020, which was halfway through my college years. So I finished my sophomore year and I learned a lot about climate change, but it was really interesting coming back home then during the pandemic and trying to compare and like bring my Bahamian perspective into it. And I think that launched me into a different career trajectory within the climate space that was a bit more about raising underrepresented voices, using journalism, using digital tools to be able to do that type of climate conservation work. So right now I'm operating kind of in that nexus between the social and the scientific and trying to find ways to use creative mediums to educate people and get people inspired for climate action.
And that's awesome. And I think a lot of people don't realize, especially here, we just don't have anyone that is in that intersection of the social and the science and the creative space that you have definitely put a foothold on. And then one of the things that you had worked on while you were there was the Columbia Climate Conversations. And I saw that you had one that talked about gender equity and climate change. You even had Kelly on one, Ashley Armstrong on the Small Island Sustainability one, which I was like, oh, okay. And then youth activism, which is growing here in the Bahamas. And so I'm really interested to hear you talk about what inspired you to do that and how did you go about picking these themes and topics and people to speak with?
Absolutely. I was really grateful to have the opportunity to do Columbia Climate Conversations. It had started out as an internship that I was doing with the Columbia Climate School, which was the Earth Institute at the time, which was a department, a sector within my university that was about environmentalism. Mm-hmm. And basically, I was working in the diversity, equity, and inclusion programs department, and they were like, you can do whatever you want. We will just, you got to figure it out. Like, you can create a project. And I was in my interview for that, and I was like, this is what I want to do. Like, I had been doing a lot of learning on my own, and even my classes, I think, you know, being in a majority white institution, being one of the few Black women in a lot of my classes, I saw the kind of irony in the fact that the people who are most impacted by climate change are not the people who are teaching me, not the people that I'm learning from, and they deserve the platform to be able to share, you know, with this institution, all of their learnings. We need more diversity in climate conversations. We need to, you know, learn from different perspectives. So with that, and also being able to mobilize, I think, some of what came from the pandemic era of digital connectivity, I was like, we're in a virtual space right now. I can use and like use this momentum of virtual spaces to do a bunch of virtual events. So the first one that I did was called Intersectional Environmentalism, and it was all about how you can draw these connections between the social and the scientific. And that one was really when attended and ended up being a jumping off point to be able to do more events. I was able to do 11 virtual events total, which was really exciting. And it was really just me being like, okay, what else do we need to learn about? Like, what else would be exciting to hear? And there was gender equity. I love the small island sustainability panel as well, being able to bring Caribbean activists to come and researchers and scientists to come and share. One of my other favorite ones was Indigenous Futures was another one. There were so many of them in retrospect, but I think they all had the kind of underlining theme of how can we, platform these different types of voices and perspectives. And it culminated in an in-person event that I was able to do, all about environmental justice in New York City and beyond. Bring in one of my favorite people, who's Leah Thomas, who wrote Intersectional Environmentalist, who gave the keynote speech at that event. And yeah, I'm really, really proud of how it mobilized the young people within the climate community at Columbia, especially people who weren't like in the climate space, to be like, now I can see myself in these different nexuses and intersections to be able to participate. It was a great educational thing for the university to have.
Yeah, that's so awesome. And I think I remember the article that I saw was the Global Citizen, and Michelle Obama had shouted you out, correct?
Yes.
That must have felt so great. And so, and as you touched a bit on the whole gender equity, and I know one of the titles that you use for yourself is, that climate and gender storyteller. Just for our audience, can you talk a bit about what that means in this space?
Absolutely. So I'll start with the word storyteller first and foremost. I think for me, the way that I've found my space within climate activism and climate action is as someone who uplifts the stories of underrepresented communities. And what being a storyteller means is finding different mediums as a way to be able to share these perspectives and to educate. So storytelling through the form of writing. I've done a lot of academic writing. I've done a lot of blog posts, poetry writing that the Eco Justice Project also shares, creative writing as well as art as a great way to educate people, thinking about films as a way to educate people, thinking about digital resources, social media, and utilizing all of these different tools to be able to share climate information and share those stories. And I think using the word story is also really important because I think it really highlights the personal and the human of it all that I think does tend to get lost a lot within climate. And I think people are really desensitized by data in a lot of ways. And I think if you're not really within the silos of climate science, one, you don't typically have access to that information. So I think accessibility of climate resources and information is very important, but also giving that information in a way that really resonates with people and in a way that, is also understandable and digestible and is not filled with jargon and really combats that apathy and desensitization to break it down to like one person's story or like one community story and really lead with empathy. So that's what my work as a storyteller is. And then climate and gender specifically. Social justice as a broad theme, I think, is something that's very important to me. Racial justice is also a very big part of my climate work. Disability justice, I also find to be very important. Indigenous justice, all the justices. But I think gender is the one that I've worked most closely with in my past jobs and in like the past work that I've done, nonprofits and organizations that I've worked with. Women and girls bear a lot of the burden when it comes to climate change and are disproportionately impacted. And thinking about the fact that like 70% of climate refugees are women, and thinking about the fact that women tend to be displaced, girls' education tends to often be sidelined when climate crises do happen. So gender justice, also women are very underrepresented in political spaces when it comes to climate and the social sphere as well. So gender justice and climate justice to me go very much hand in hand, and uplifting those stories of women and girls of climate from these communities is that's where my work lies.
Sweet spot. Yeah, nice. So I would love to hear you talk a bit more about the Eco Justice Project.
Absolutely. The Eco Justice Project, my pride and joy. I started during 2020. I had such cabin fever, I guess. I was just learning so much in my university courses, and I was home for the pandemic. And this was also after Hurricane Dorian had happened as
Mhm.
well. So I was returning home. I wasn't here for Dorian, but my family was, and I was coming back and I was seeing the devastation. And even though I wasn't here for Dorian, it was a case study that we were talking about in my classes. And I think that was a really interesting space to be in at a university in my learning, to be able to think about my personal home, in my community, and what that means within this global context of climate. So that was pulsing around in my head as I was getting started with this. And I just had a lot on my mind. And I was like, I'm just going to start a blog. I'm going to start a blog. I'm going to start writing articles. I started making infographics, and it was like a little social media page. And it used to be called the Eco Gal. If you were there for back when it started, it was the Eco Gal. It was your fave island girl's guide to sustainability. And
Love that.
it was very much me, just wanting to be able to facilitate these types of difficult conversations about whether it's fast fashion, whether it was sustainable food systems, from like a Bahamian perspective. And then around the time when George Floyd's murders happened, I was very much thinking about the intersection of racial justice and social justice when it came to conversations about like climate. I looked at all the people who were following me, and a lot of them were like middle-aged white women, and I was like, this is not very much indicative of the sphere of what climate change is. And I started following people that I really looked up to, like Leah Thomas, intersectional environmentalism, and there just started to be more of these conversations about needing more diversity in the climate space. And
Yeah.
that really inspired me to kind of shift what the platform was about to being very much about environmentalism from a justice perspective, and how we can understand the disproportionate burden that people from these vulnerable communities have when it comes to the climate crisis. So I was very much passionate about that as being the theme of what the platform wanted to be about. And then it became more about, okay, how do I want to do this education? And how do I want for this platform to form? And I think it's really interesting. I think the platform has evolved with me as I have, and as I think the state of the world has. It very much began within the digital education sphere of like infographics. Like there was a time when people were really using that to get their education. And then it became more about social media page, and reels were performing really well. And I was just trying to like follow the times of like what people could find accessibly to get this information. And then I went through a phase or a transition within myself where I was really thinking about the type of content that I consume and what it is that I would like to create an archival record of. And it was thinking about this intersection of creative writing, thinking about art, and how those types of mediums have the power to inform and inspire. And I saw this art piece. I wish I could remember the name of it, but it really resonated with me. And it was the whole picture says 1,000 words thing. And it was like the most accessible way that people could see themselves as a part of environmentalism. So now the Eco Justice Project platform is about art, poetry, interviews with different activists from around the world, long form articles, more long form content than a social media page, but it
Mhm.
functions more now as a publication for underrepresented voices within the climate space and finding creative ways to talk about these issues. I have 3 staff writers from the Maldives,
Nice.
Trinidad, and Berkeley, California, who
Nice.
write pieces, speaking to their personal experiences, doing interviews. And it's nice to have a Caribbean perspective as well too. The small island developing states are always very important to me, and being able to compare that to the Maldives, another small island in the Pacific, is also a
Mhm.
really interesting platform to have. So there's been stories about the water crisis in Guam. There's been stories about like the Philippines, Kenya, a lot of different global stories, and understanding those undercurrents of colonialism, of development and capitalism, and how they play into our understanding of climate. So that was a big broad spiel, but basically it's something that I'm really proud of, and something that I'm excited to continue to see grow. And I think the publication maybe like digital magazine sphere is kind of more of what I'm moving towards for, but definitely really proud of the long form content to be able to archive.
Nice. Now, I know you said you had 3 staff writers, but do you accept submissions from people? Like if I had decided I wanted to write something, like how would I go about maybe reaching out to you and saying, "Hey, I want to feature this. This is the topic I'm passionate about."
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. There's the 3 staff writers and a lot of submissions. So the Eco Justice Project thrives on submissions as well too. You send an email to submit@ecojusticeproject.com, or there's a portion of the website where you can also submit a form and submit. But I will accept any type of content. Really, there's people who have submitted their art to me, or one of the most recent pieces was a wildlife photographer who submitted some of her work as well and wrote a piece to accompany it. There's a lot of poetry submissions. Poetry is like the most of the submissions that I typically get. And I'll work with you on them. I'm like the editor in chief, so I'm very much, I'll work with you on the piece and then we'll get it to where it needs to be and then I'll publish it. And it's been really nice to see too, there's a lot of people who are established writers who just want a forum to be able to post their work and be like, my work has been, digitally, published in these places. And it's nice for the Eco Justice Project to function as that type of journal as well for writers or aspiring writers to be able to share their work.
Do you have like I hope this doesn't make you like get put on the spot, but do you have like a story or a submission that immediately jumps out that you thought, "Oh my gosh, I'm so happy this person found this space and was able to submit this amazing topic."
Absolutely. I don't want to single any out because I've gotten a lot of lovely submissions, but one of the ones that resonated with me the most was this writer, their name's Diane, and they wrote this piece called Compost, which was one of the most beautiful poems I'd ever read. It resonated with me very, very deeply, and they are a writer based in Singapore and had 2 pieces that they submitted. One was about a natural disaster that had happened in Singapore, and this one, Compost, was about understanding our place within the environment. And they were comparing a lot of environmental imagery to also collective grief with like the state of the world as well. It's such a wonderful piece. It's so good. It's Compost. It's on the Eco Justice Project website. Go check it
Oh,
out.
I'd have to check it out later.
No, you do. I was so happy that they'd found the piece. And then whenever people email me and they're like, I want to submit my work to the Eco Justice Project, one, everyone's like, oh, thank you to the Eco Justice Project team. And I'm like, it's just me, but thank you. But second of all, they're just always very excited and grateful that the platform exists. And I think it feels very beautiful to see something that I created for a specific purpose be able to reach people in that way, and that they're so excited and grateful it exists, and that I'm excited it exists. It's like a very beautiful exchange that we're having, and I'm grateful that they want to submit their work, and they're grateful that I want to publish it, and it's beautiful display of community, I think, as well. So,
And did they
Compost.
say how they found the website or the project?
I think that they found it through the Instagram. I think a lot of people find the Instagram is where a lot of the following is, but it's also through word of mouth, I think, as well. Like I've had a couple more Maldivian submissions since Ijunab was one of the staff writers started submitting his work. And then one of his friends, she wrote a beautiful poem and she had film photos that she'd taken that we put to accompany it as well of the Maldives. It's such fun creative work. I think that this is where my passion really lies, but I'm learning so much about these respective, countries and communities and people, and then being able to display it in a way that's first of all beautiful. Like the photos are beautiful, the poetry is beautiful. It's just overall stunning work, but at the same time, it's just very different than what it would be like to read an academic article about this, or what it would be like, I don't know, a news article. I think the tone is just very different. And I think that this type of writing is what resonates and what reaches people in like the heart, which is where we need it to hit, for collective change to be able to happen.
Yeah, that's important. And I love earlier when you talked about coming from a place of empathy, when you talk about climate action and climate change. And that's what's really important, because a lot of times, again, like whether it's not getting to them or not, a lot of people are tired of reading newspaper articles and reading some of these reports or watching things. Whereas when you're leading from a place that's speaking directly of the individual or the community's voice, it helps to kind of just tie that message home. And just speaking of thinking internationally, I know you've done a lot of global speaking engagements. You've been able to travel to so many places in the world to talk about this and just be there in the space, right, of climate change in a lot of different areas. Can you tell us a bit about that? What are some of the places you've been, some of the things that you took away, some of your favorite spots even?
Travel guide. Yes, I'm really grateful that I've had the opportunity to go. I've seen a lot of different countries over the past 2 years, and I'm trying to think of which ones have stood out to be the most. I think definitely most recently, I was doing a speaking engagement in Panama, which is for Latin American Caribbean Climate Week. That one resonated with me on a lot of different fronts. I think one, first and foremost, because a lot of the time when I'm invited to speak at these engagements, they're pretty high level. So it was like the UN was organizing it, the government of Panama was organizing it. But at the same time that this was happening, it was when there were a lot of protests in Panama as well towards the government because of some mining extraction that they were doing. So they were doing some terrible environmental things while hosting this climate week, the government being. And it was such an interesting dichotomy. This story just stands out to me so much because it was an interesting display of people and their collective power. So and I think that we can't really rely on our governments as well, and that people are the ones who hold the power for change, because there were a lot of Panamanians who were barred access from the conference and had their access revoked because they were supporting these protests for an environmental conference. And then the government was talking about, we love youth engagement, but then young people were being, threatened for protesting. And while I was there, the protests were going on and they were like, it's not safe, blah, blah, blah. But we were like, we stand in solidarity with the protesters, obviously. And then over the course of the next month, the protests became increasingly more violent, but there were so many people, like thousands and thousands of people. And at the end of the month, they got what they wanted. The contract was completely barred. And I was so proud to have been there at the beginning of that moment to see it come to fruition, because we don't get that many success stories about, people protesting and the protesting actually works. And I think that, people who are doing bad things rely on our hopelessness and being like, oh, like it's not going to work anyway, so it doesn't matter, I shouldn't try at all. And they
Yeah.
tried so hard and they got what they were looking for. And like the Supreme Court level of Panama, they were like, this is unconstitutional, like it's going to be infringe on their human rights to do this to the environment. I'm like, this is such an important feat. And I was grateful to have been there for the beginning of that. So I will say, like, that Panama trip stands out to me and has fueled me with so much hope. And I'm going to name off some countries that I've been to, but I did most recent one was in Mexico City, which I'm grateful for. Colombia as well. I really enjoyed the speaking engagements I've done in Latin America. I think it's really interesting. People tend to think of Latin American Caribbean as a region holistically. And I think there's a lot of differences and a lot of similarities, but I think that we don't typically get that many opportunities to form that type of regional solidarity. I think it's hard enough within the Caribbean, accessibility wise, on our own to find regional solidarity. So then bringing Latin America in there, it's interesting to be able to work together. As well as in Europe, I think one of my first big speaking engagements was in Prague, Czech Republic. At the time, that was the furthest I'd ever been from home, which was like a very big deal. Saudi Arabia is now the furthest I've been. Where else? Barbados also was really, really lovely. I was there for the Caribbean Youth Climate Conference, which I was grateful to have the opportunity to help to organize, as well as hosting an art and poetry workshop, a storytelling workshop there. So overall, I'm happy to have those opportunities. I'm happy to bring the Bahamas into those spaces as well too. I tend to typically be the only Bahamian there, sometimes the only young person there, sometimes the only Black woman there. I'm like fulfilling a lot of diversity boxes, and I'm grateful that I'm able to bring my perspective and my humanhood into those arenas where they're necessary.
Yeah, and I'm sure just I can try and speak for all the Bahamian people, but we are grateful for your representation. I think it's so important that you, just as a Bahamian, and you are proud of your Bahamianness, and you represent us, and you go out there and you share the stories. But if we were to just bring it back home, I was super excited to hear about your See My Island, the storytelling summer camp you did last year in Eleuthera. Was this the first one, correct?
This was the first one. My pride and joy. It was, and that was my most fulfilling experience for sure, for sure.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
yeah, this past summer, See My Island was a summer camp for young girls ages 11 to 16 to be able to learn more about climate change. We did field trips to the coral reefs and the mangroves, and they were also learning at the same time different storytelling skills and photography, filmmaking, creative writing, art. We did a workshop with recycled glass as well too, which they really really enjoyed, and the 2 weeks culminated in them being able to create their own creative projects. So like they made short videos, wrote some poems, did some art pieces all about what they had learned over the course of the 2 weeks about climate change. And it was just so exciting, it was so fulfilling. I think even though they made such beautiful projects, and it was about the projects, it was about the education, but I think most of all it was honestly just about cultivating a space for them to feel like their voices are important. And I think the biggest takeaway was them just understanding that people care about what they have to say, and that they became so much more confident over the course of the 2 weeks. And I think for me, when I was creating the camp and trying to build the curriculum, I was like, what did I want at that age? What did I need at that age? What didn't I have that I think would have meant a lot to me? And I was carrying that with me over the course of the 2 weeks too. Like they would come and show me, even like outside of camp materials, they'd be like, I wrote this song, like I want to show it to you. I don't think it's that good, but like I'm just like, no, it's so good. Let me hear it. And I was just like really trying to be like very, very encouraging with them. And it really paid off. It was so emotional towards the end, but I was really, really so proud of them. And I hope there can be another one. There will be if I have anything to say about it. But it was a beautiful time. And I had the opportunity to shoot a short film about the summer camp
Oh,
while
nice.
there. So that's in editing right now. It's one of my current projects that's going on. So in the next couple months, you'll be able to see my island camp in action.
That is exciting. And I do hope you get to do another one. I think we need more things like that simply because, like you said, oh, someone's actually caring about what I have to say, but also just showing our youth, right? I was going to say our young kids, but just the youth, that there are other things that they can pursue to find meaning and purpose in their life. I think a lot of times in the Bahamas, just because we are a small island, and our parents have taught us that this is the key to being successful, make a lot of money and do this and do that, but really it's about finding something you're passionate about. And I think exposing them to what you were able to during that camp must have been so life changing for some of them, that I'm
Yeah.
excited to see, in a couple of years, out of all of those girls, who would have been some of the ones that came out and, continued this passion. So you should feel
Yeah.
really good. That's exciting.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think the creative industry does not get as much investment as it does. And I think that's something that we need to invest in a lot more, both
Right.
on an interpersonal level and a stigma level around like what types of jobs are deemed to be respectable, but on a more systemic
Yeah.
level, like where do we put our investment and our funding? And creative industries definitely need a lot more of that. So I hope
Mhm.
being able to do more projects like this and being able to illustrate the impact will encourage more of that type of investment. That's what I'm hoping with the film as well too. Like, look at how great this is, give me more money so I can do more. How about
Exactly. I think Bahamians are just such creative people. Like anyone who I've ever met, any tourists that I've ever met that has come to the Bahamas, especially if they've attended Junk Canoe, they always say how Bahamians are just so creative. And I'm like, you haven't even seen the half of it. So
that?
super excited. And especially when you have that intersection of conservation, which is another huge space that has this huge gap. It's exciting to think about all the potential, and hopefully, you can lead the way in filling that gap as well. But I also want to talk about something more recently that you had in Grand Bahama. It was artistry in the archipelago, correct?
Yes,
How
absolutely.
was that? Tell me about that.
It was such a great time. I hosted this event with one of my dear friends, Amber Turner, Miss Sustainability. And when I did the art and creative writing storytelling workshop when we were at the conference in Barbados, it went so well. It was the most engaged event because I think first and foremost, it had such tantalizing conversation because people were so excited to think about how like music and film and all of these different things can intersect with climate. But even further than that, people just were excited to create and to make things. And then afterwards, Amber was just like, we need to do this in Grand Bahama. Like that was so good. And we were like, actually, we should. Like, let's totally do that. So over the next like couple months, we were like, all right, we're gonna make this happen. And we had this event at Lignum Vitae Marketplace, which is a beautiful space as well too. And it was such a nice merging of all of the things that I find to be so important that we really value. It was an opportunity. We had environmental organizations, so Coral Vita, Waterkeepers, Earth Care, and Blue Action Lab had a pop-up for the first hour of the event where people could come in and learn from them. They had displays on the tables. Waterkeepers had their mangrove book to give out to the kids. Also, another great thing about this event was the fact that we had people attending from age 6 to age 60. Like there was a very, very big age range. This was a family affair on a Saturday afternoon. And people were really grateful too, because you don't really get to see that many types of events on Grand Bahama to be able to, do something on a Saturday afternoon with your kids. It's really wholesome and you learn something. But people got to learn from the organizations. And then we also had a lot of local artists be able to bring their work. So we had some local painters come in, as well as local craft makers be able to sell their work, jewelry makers, a lot of handmade Bahamian items and crafts for people to look at and buy. And then the last 2 hours of the event, we had workshops in painting led by Dominique Barnaby, who is a local Grand Bahamian artist, and crafting, and I led the creative writing workshop as well too. So people were able to go to as many as they could fit into the 2 hours, and people were really excited. They did some painting and some crafting. They wrote some really great poems that I was excited to work with them on, and it was a very successful event, very well attended, and just a really great display of creativity and climate coming together in action.
Nice. Do you think we have another one coming in the future?
Absolutely. Amber and I are on it. She's here. We're working on it. We're
I have
gonna.
a question for me, as an Asuvian, do you think we'll see this happening on any other island?
I hope so. We're hoping to do go around and as many places as we can. I think it's all about having the resources, obviously, to be able to put events on. But if it's up to us, we're gonna work hard to make sure that it happens. I think again, being able to do a summer camp on Eleuthera was a really big deal because I think a lot of opportunities do tend to go to Nassau instead of the rest of the islands. So I think thinking about Eleuthera, thinking about Abaco is something where we've been eyeing as well too. Just being able to invest in as many communities as we can, bring as many people in as we can. We'll do it.
Yeah. So can you tell us about maybe what's next for the year for you?
Next for the year, I'm definitely, the film first and foremost. That's my most pressing project. I'm working on the editing of that now, bringing all the footage together. So within the next couple months, that will be put out into the world. In terms of my personal goals, I would like to continue working within the film industry very broadly. And my next position that I'm going to take on and projects that I'm going to be working on will be more in honing my skills as a storyteller, trying to figure out my best ways to think about what mediums I'm most interested in investing in, which I think will be filmmaking. I think my ultimate goal, like 10 years or like 15 years from now, is I would love to write, direct, and act in something that I make about a climate issue. So even if it's like a fiction piece that has a lot of like educational, social impact aspects, I think social impact storytelling, social impact filmmaking is where my passion really is. On top of that, the Eco Justice Project is still brewing, so I've got more pieces incoming. Staff writers are working around the clock. They're great. And more submissions to come in. If anyone listening wants to do a submission, you know where to find me. But I think working on how best to increase the reach of that platform, to reach more people, have more stories come out of that, thinking about the creation of a digital magazine or a newsletter of some kind, or also getting more grants, or finding grants to be able to expand the work of that project is very important. And last and always, just investing in home and communities. I plan to be in Grand Bahama for the next year or so. So whatever I can do here, and throughout the Bahamas to work on some local projects, local initiatives, put a little bit of roots down, invest back in my community, all feels really fulfilling and important.
That's so exciting. How can viewers find out? Is it just the Instagram? I know we talked about submissions at the Eco Justice Project website. How else can someone reach out to you? Like, are there any opportunities as well that maybe if someone says, hey, I love what you're doing, can I also do this with you? Or can I mentor under you? Or do you have internships?
Mhm. That is totally up for discussion. I think if anyone is interested, yes, Instagram. Also, my email is lauren@theecojusticeproject.com. That's in my Instagram bio, but please feel free to reach out. I think if anyone's interested in writing or learning, or even just wants to, talk and spitball some ideas as well too, I think community as in and of itself is very important to me. So I always love when people want to reach out and want to get involved. Um, an internship could be, there's always like volunteer opportunities as well to think about whether people are abroad or if they're in the Bahamas. I think that there's different ways to collaborate, but I would be open to any type of collaboration or partnership. And I think submitting something, again, I've had some people who have never written before, like, I'm going to submit something and write it to the Good Justice Project. And I think that that's really great too. So you don't have to be a seasoned writer or a professional, whatever that means, to be able to contribute. So even if it's your first time ever writing, but you really want to, let me know and we can work
Yeah,
together on it. But yeah, Lauren@theecojusticeproject.com is my email.
love it. So as we start to wind down, I am curious to hear about who is someone in the sector, whether there's someone local or international, that inspires you and why?
hmm I think my favorite person right now is Alexis Pauline Gumbs. I don't know if you know who she is, but she wrote this book that I really, really love. It's called Undrowned. I got a tattoo from it. It's one of my favorite pieces ever. But
No.
she's a Caribbean writer, and she had written this book. It's called Black Feminist Lessons for Marine Mammals, Undrowned. And it's about how basically the things that we can learn from marine animals and how we can learn about how to collaborate, how to just live better and live more fruitful lives through the lens of comparing ourselves to the way that marine animals operate. And I think as someone who's so passionate about marine conservation and being Caribbean and identity, she writes it in like a very poetic way as well, merging the creative together. And if I was to ever write a book, it would be something I would want to write something very similar to this. So I really admire the work that she does to increase visibility of Black Caribbean women, and yes, she's just very talented. I recommend everyone read Undrowned. It's like my favorite book of all time. It's
Nice.
very
I literally just pulled it up. I'm like, oh, I gotta check this out.
get into it. Get into it. No, she's great, and she also is currently writing either a memoir or biography of Audre Lorde, who I also really really admire. She's my favorite poet.
Oh, lovely.
Mhm.
Awesome. So what would you say are some maybe life lessons or some final thoughts that you'd want to share with viewers who may be watching and thinking, well, I really want to do something about this, but I don't know how to get into it, or maybe is starting something like this but needs some motivation or some guidance?
Absolutely. I would say that leading with passion is always very fulfilling, and I think consistency is key as well too when it comes to wanting a project to grow, but also even just in doing the work. Like I think if you're going into it thinking solely about what you'll be able to get out of it, you miss the fun of the journey, And when I was creating the Eco Justice Project, it was not because I wanted to have a big platform or because I imagined that it would be the publication that it is now. It was genuinely just because I had things that I wanted to say and they needed to get out of my head and onto something tangible. I
Yeah,
could have gotten a journal, but I chose a website instead. So I
that's
think
hilarious.
I think it was, but I think that that's what been able to keep me going with it for so long. Like it's been it'll be 4 years this year since I created that blog. And I am really grateful, I think, that I let passion guide me and inspiration guide me, even when it got tough. There was times when I was balancing it with a bunch of other things, but I think lead with love and also have community to lean on, I think, is also very important. So I wouldn't have been able to do the work that I do without all of the amazing women that I've met and that I've followed and that I've been able to connect with through this. I think don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to learn from others, and then really seek out information is what I will also say. Like, I did a lot of personal research, because I was just genuinely interested in learning more things. And I think the more you know and the more informed you are, the more you can inform others, and the more you feel like you have a place within the movement as well. And I think it's such a daunting thing, climate change. It's such a huge issue. It's such a multi-sectoral issue. And I think a lot of times we can feel very hopeless. And I think something that's also really helped me is reframing what impact looks like as well too. Like, I can't save the world on my own. I'm just a girl. But the work that I can do individual to individual within my own community, trying is always better than not trying, is my motto and my go-to. So thanks.
Trying is always better than not trying.
Yeah. And yeah, there was another quote that I like that I was thinking about earlier as well. And it was this Indigenous activist, and she was talking about the fact that change happens at the speed of empathy. And in order for things to actually get done, you need to have that political will, you need to have that human will to actually want to make change happen. And that can only come when you really see yourself in other people's shoes and trying to understand collective struggle and how things are all interconnected. So I think that comes with the being informed and doing research, but also leading with that empathy and humanity is what we need to make things actually happen.
Definitely. I do want to ask one more thing before I let you go. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on why you think youth activism, especially in the climate space, is so important now more than ever.
Oh my goodness, it's so, so important. It's now more than ever in the sense of, I think that we are coming up upon a revolution of sorts. Like, I think people are very, very tired of the status quo. We see that it's not working. And I think the digital age and social media, I think social media tends to be undervalued and stigmatized as juvenile or whatever you have it, or not a serious form of journalism or education or understanding. I think having social media and that accessibility and that interconnectedness to be able to know what's happening in other parts of the world, being able to gain firsthand perspectives is so essential for us having a collective understanding of how things are really messed up, basically, for lack of a better word. I think thinking about Palestine very specifically as an instance of a genocide that's happening, that because of social media, we are able to have access to firsthand accounts and see people posting videos, sharing their photos and stories, and at the same time seeing what, big, like, what are they called? Publications like the New York Times are saying, and it's completely in contrast with what we're actually seeing in front of our eyes. And now we're thinking about all the times when journalism has been biased before, or when agendas have surmounted truth in a lot of different scenarios. So I think because we have that as young people who are chronically online in some instances, you can't BS us, for lack of a better word, in the way that I think it's been able to in the past. So I think because of that, we have a bit more of that, like, global citizenship. We have a bit more of that desire for change. I think we've also just seen society evolve so rapidly and hugely during our lifetimes. And I think to a certain extent that emboldens us to be able to create any change that we want to see. So I think that definitely makes young people very radical advocates for change. And we have tools now that we didn't have in the past. And we have ideas that I think are just challenging the status quo in a lot of great ways.
I love that. And I almost wonder if you could sum up that and then just put it into the Bahamian context. Like, I think sometimes, and I hope I don't step on toes, but maybe I shouldn't care because this is my show. I feel like a lot of times we've seen some youth tokenism
Oh,
And
always.
I mean, and we see it globally, but as far as the current state of affairs for youth activism in the Bahamas, what are your thoughts on what's happening? Do we need more youth? We have a lot of youth already involved. Like, what would you say it's like right now for Bahamians when it comes to the youth activism for the climate space? Because I know we need it for so many other issues, but if we focus specifically on the climate and conservation, and even like with your whole title, climate and gender in this space, what would you say your thoughts are?
Yes. I would say always more youth, more the better. I think that unfortunately, a lot of the times when it comes to opportunities to whether it's to speak or be involved, it is kind of who you know type of thing. And it's like if you have this connection, then you're going to be in this space, but it's not necessarily always merit based. And I think that we need to broaden our net or reach of who is actually involved in the same climate conversations. Like it can't be the same two or three people every single time. Like there's more climate advocates than that in the Bahamas who deserve a platform to speak and share their ideas. And yeah, it can't be tokenistic, and it has been for a very long time. It's like we have our young people here, like look at them, let's show them off, but let's not actually listen to what they have to say, and we're not going to actually give them any political power in any type of way. But it's just like a box ticked in terms of diversity, and I think it really, really undervalues young people. It's like a slap in the face in a lot of ways to be like, you don't really know what you're talking about. Like I know better than you know, and I think that is just very untrue, honestly, and it grossly underestimates young people and what they have to offer this country, which I think is so much, and it's so much that we need. And again, I think we are thinking about the status quo. Like I think that status quo in this country has been reinforced for a very long time. Something's got to shake. Something's got to, change up. And I think that young people are the tool to be able to do that because we're coming with a fresh set of eyes. What it's like to grow up within a system that we've seen and witnessed gives us a different perspective than if you've been in it for a different amount of time or in a different position. So say more youth and take the youth seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think to add to that, I feel like a lot of the youth have so much more exposure because of the internet and social media. Whereas we find with the older generations, if they're not well traveled, they're not very exposed. But we have the opportunity, even just when you think about the Eco Justice Project. I mean, you have Maldives, Trinidad, you have someone in California, and you're here in the Bahamas, and it's all these voices coming together to talk about some of the same issues that impacts us all disproportionately. So youth get out there and just keep pushing and know that and again, I would think about the story in Panama. Like they were protesting, and a lot of times we push for something and we start and we don't finish and we don't follow through because of that hopelessness. But I hope that that's a story that will inspire so many people. I had no idea of that, and I genuinely felt inspired to know that you just got to keep pushing. You have to know that it's making some change, and you may not see the ripple effects, but somebody else will, and somebody else may benefit from that. So that sums it up. I don't want to keep you longer, but I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with you, and I'm definitely looking forward to hopefully having you back on in the future, collaborate with you in the future as well, and just keep pushing the Bahamas forward.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I also really enjoyed this conversation.
Definitely. And thank you so much to all our viewers for tuning into another episode of Siren Sundays. Stay tuned for more episodes, and we'll actually have Amber Turner coming on this season as well. So I'm super excited to talk to her. And again, thank you for spending your Sunday afternoon with me.
Thank you. Okay, take care. Bye.
You too.